The gold pen glided across the polished oak table until it stopped against my dinner plate. It was the same pen my mother had used every Christmas for as long as I could remember, the one she signed holiday cards with, the one she proudly called her lucky pen. Tonight, it wasn't meant for a Christmas card. It was meant for me. The room fell so silent that even the soft ticking of the grandfather clock seemed unbearably loud. 3 men in expensive suits sat across the dining room, leather briefcases open neatly beside them. Thick stacks of legal papers covered the table, illuminated by the warm yellow light my mother always insisted made the house feel welcoming. It didn't feel welcoming. It felt like a courtroom. My father kept staring into his untouched glass of water. My younger sister, Morgan, wore the smile of someone already spending money she didn't have. And my mother, she folded her hands together with perfect calm. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "Sign it, Fay." Her voice was gentle, almost loving. "Or you'll regret it." The words floated across the table like poison wrapped in velvet. I looked at the pen. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at the people who had spent 34 years teaching me that family meant sacrifice. Only tonight, I finally understood something. They had never wanted my love. They had only ever wanted my signature. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I quietly said one sentence. Within 60 seconds, 3 lawyers were packing their briefcases. My mother was screaming. My sister was crying. My father couldn't even look at me. And the family that had spent decades pretending to stand together collapsed in front of my eyes. But none of that makes sense unless I tell you how it really began, because this story didn't start with lawyers, or contracts, or $90,000. It started with a single phone call. One ordinary Tuesday morning, one cheerful voice, and one request that sounded so harmless, it almost destroyed my entire life. People often describe me as quiet, reserved, polite. They think silence is part of my personality. It isn't. Silence is something I learned. When you grow up inside a family where every conversation can suddenly become an emergency, you learn very quickly that speaking less keeps you safer. I'm Fay Sinclair, 34 years old, owner of a small bookkeeping firm above an old hardware store in Harlow, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Just 2 modest offices. A coffee machine that worked only when it wanted to. Stacks of invoices, tax files, receipts, numbers. I loved numbers because numbers never lied. People did. Every single day. By 8 every morning I'd unlock the office, brew coffee, organize client folders, and enjoy 2 peaceful hours before the phone started ringing. Those 2 hours belonged to me. To quiet, to certainty, to order. The exact opposite of the home where I'd grown up. Daniel usually arrived around 8:30 carrying breakfast from the little bakery across the street. 2 coffees, 2 buttered croissants. Always exactly the same. He never forgot. He never rushed. He never demanded attention. He simply placed breakfast beside my desk and smiled. Morning. Just one word. Yet somehow, it always felt like coming home. Sometimes I caught myself watching him while pretending to review spreadsheets. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply safe. Growing up, I'd never known people like that existed. In my family, love was loud. Love was conditional. Love always came attached to an invoice. I just didn't realize the bill wouldn't arrive until years later. That Tuesday started like every other. Invoices. Coffee. Payroll reports. Then my cell phone vibrated. The screen lit up with one name. Mom. My stomach tightened instantly. Funny how the body recognizes danger before the mind does. I let it ring once. Twice. That tiny delay had become my only rebellion. A private act of resistance no one else would ever notice. Finally, I answered. "Hi, Mom." "Oh, Faye," she said brightly. "I have the most wonderful news." The excitement in her voice wasn't happiness. I knew that tone. It was the voice she used whenever she wanted something expensive. Daniel looked up from his paperwork. He didn't ask what was wrong. He simply watched my face change. Because he already knew. Whenever my mother called, nothing good ever followed. I turned my chair toward the office window, pretending to watch the traffic outside. In reality, I was preparing myself for whatever came next. "It's about your sister," my mother said happily. "Morgan is engaged." I closed my eyes for just a second. Morgan, of course, everything in our family eventually became about Morgan. I smiled anyway. "That's wonderful, Mom." "It is," she nearly squealed. "Ethan Aldridge proposed last night." She paused dramatically before adding the last name, as if it were royalty. The Aldridges. In Harlow County, everyone knew that name. They owned construction companies, farmland, shopping centers, and half the commercial buildings downtown. Their family name was engraved on the children's wing of the local hospital. To my mother, the Aldridges weren't just wealthy. They were status, respect, proof that the Sinclair family had finally climbed into a better class of people. "We're going to have the most beautiful wedding this town has ever seen," she continued excitedly. "The Aldridges deserve something elegant." I listened quietly, because I already knew where this conversation was going. Whenever my mother started talking about beauty, someone else usually paid for it. She laughed softly. "We've started looking at venues, florists, catering, a live orchestra. Her excitement grew with every word. Then she casually said the number that made my heart stop. It'll probably cost around $50,000. Silence. Not because she expected me to answer, because she expected me to understand. And I did, perfectly. My parents had never earned $50,000 in a single year, not once. Certainly not after my father's business collapsed, which meant that number wasn't information, it was an invoice. Your father and I are stretched so thin, she sighed dramatically. But you've done so well, Fay. There isn't anyone else we can ask. There it was. Not congratulations, not celebration, expectation. The invisible contract I'd been signing my entire life. You've always been our responsible one. Responsible? I hated that word. Other daughters were called successful, independent, strong. I was called responsible. A prettier word for useful, a softer word for available. Growing up, every compliment came with a bill attached. You're so mature. Translation, take care of your sister. You're so dependable. Translation, solve another problem. We're so proud of you. Translation, open your wallet. My mother had perfected the language years ago. She never asked directly. She wrapped requests inside compliments until saying no felt like rejecting love itself. Mom, I began carefully. Her voice cooled just enough for me to notice. Family doesn't keep score, Fay. The sentence hit me like an old scar. She'd been saying those exact words since I was 16 years old. Every single time money entered the conversation. Every single time. Family doesn't keep score. Yet somehow, I was always the only one paying the bill. I'll have to think about it, I said quietly. She didn't hear uncertainty. She heard victory. I knew you'd understand. She was already planning flower arrangements before we ended the call. The phone went silent. I kept staring at it long after the screen went dark. Daniel placed a fresh cup of coffee beside me without saying a word. Then he finally asked the question. How much? I gave a humorless laugh. 50,000. His eyebrows lifted. For the wedding. So they say. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He never rushed to give advice. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He believed silence deserved room before solutions. Finally, he spoke. And what do you want? The question caught me off guard. Not what my family wanted. Not what was expected. What I wanted. Nobody had asked me that in years. I stared into my coffee. Part of me wanted to write the check immediately. End the arguments. Avoid the guilt. Keep the peace. That old instinct still lived inside me. The instinct that believed fixing everyone else's problems somehow made me worthy of being loved. Daniel watched me carefully. You don't have to answer me, he said softly. But answer yourself. His words stayed with me long after he returned to work. Because the truth was, I already knew my answer. I was just terrified of saying it out loud. That afternoon, while organizing payroll reports, memories kept creeping back. The first bill I'd ever paid wasn't mine. I was 16. My father's construction business was collapsing. The electric company had mailed a bright red shutoff notice. My mother sat at the kitchen table crying. Morgan watched cartoons in the next room, completely unaware. I had been saving money for a school trip, $211. Months of after-school shifts at Walgreens. I handed every dollar to my mother without thinking. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I don't know what we'd do without you. At 16, those words felt like love. Looking back, they were training. That moment changed everything. After that day, whenever there was an emergency, everyone looked at me. Car repairs, medical bills, Morgan's braces, college deposits, apartment rent, credit card debt, a totaled car, unexpected taxes, broken appliances. Every crisis somehow landed in my lap, and every single time, I convinced myself it was temporary, that someday, someone would help me too. They never did. Because once people become comfortable standing under your umbrella, they stop noticing you're the one getting soaked. By the time I turned 34, I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I had quietly become the family's emergency fund, and I didn't even realize it. Not until $50,000 arrived disguised as a wedding gift. Not until I heard myself seriously considering another sacrifice. Not because I wanted to, because I had forgotten I was allowed to say no. That night, neither of us mentioned the wedding during dinner. Not because we'd forgotten about it, because it was sitting between us like a third person at the table. Heavy, silent, impossible to ignore. The rain tapped gently against the kitchen window while Daniel rinsed the dishes. I sat at the table, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. My mind kept replaying my mother's voice. You've always been our responsible one. Responsible. Such a beautiful word. Until you realize it simply means, you're the one we'll keep using. Daniel dried his hands with a towel and sat across from me. For a long moment he simply watched me. Not impatiently. Not waiting for me to speak. Just Waiting. That was his gift. He never tried to rescue me from my silence. He trusted me to find my own way out. Finally, I broke it. I think they're right. He frowned slightly. About what? I have the money. So technically, I could help. Daniel nodded once. You could. His answer surprised me. No lecture. No argument. No immediate disagreement. Just the truth. I looked up. You don't think I should? He smiled sadly. I think that's the wrong question. I blinked. What do you mean? He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. The real question isn't whether you can help. It's whether helping actually helps. The words settled quietly between us. I'd never thought about it like that before. For years, helping and loving had meant exactly the same thing. Daniel continued gently. Tell me something. When was the last time your parents asked how you were doing? Without asking for something 5 minutes later? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I searched my memory. Christmas, birthdays, family dinners, phone calls. Every conversation eventually circled back to money, or Morgan, or another emergency, another crisis, another problem only I could solve. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had simply asked, "Are you okay?" Without an agenda, without a request, without a price. Daniel saw the answer on my face before I spoke. I thought so. He stood up, walked into the living room, and returned carrying a small notebook. It wasn't new. The edges were worn. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting. He placed it gently in front of me. Open it. I did. Every page contained numbers, dates, amounts, short notes. March 12. Loaned parents $1,800 for furnace repair. July 8th. Paid Morgan's apartment deposit. October 21st. Covered dad's tax penalty. January 5th. Paid for mom's dental procedure. Page after page. Year after year. I stared at it. When did you make this? I didn't. You did. I looked at him, confused. He smiled. These are your receipts. My receipts? You keep copies of everything. You're a bookkeeper. You've been documenting your life without realizing it. I slowly turned another page, then another. The numbers never stopped. Thousands, then tens of thousands, then more. Every sacrifice, every rescue, every check I'd ever written, every promise I'd made, every emergency I'd solved, every financial wound I'd quietly stitched together. My throat tightened. Oh my God, Daniel nodded. You've spent nearly 16 years saving your family. And yet, he gently tapped the final blank page. They're asking you to save them again. I whispered the number aloud. I've given them so much. You have. He waited, then asked the question that changed my life forever. Can you point to a single problem they solved because you paid? I frowned. What? Think about it. He leaned back. You paid for the car. They bought another one. You covered the debt. They borrowed again. You rescued them. They had another emergency. He looked directly into my eyes. Were you helping, or were you financing the next disaster? The room suddenly felt very quiet, because deep inside, I already knew. Every time I rescued them, I taught them they never had to change. I hadn't been ending problems. I'd been postponing them. And every delay came directly out of my own future. That realization hurt more than any argument ever could. Not because my family had taken advantage of me, but because I'd helped them do it. I had mistaken guilt for generosity, obligation for love, exhaustion for loyalty. For 16 years, I'd been paying tuition to a school that only taught one lesson. The more you give without boundaries, the more people expect. I covered my face with my hands. I don't know how to stop. Daniel reached across the table and gently held my fingers. You already do. I do? He nodded. You stop exactly the same way every accountant fixes a bad ledger. I looked at him. You stop adding new losses. A tear rolled silently down my cheek. Not because I was weak, because for the first time in my life, someone had given me permission to protect myself. Before we went to bed, Daniel asked one final question. If you say no, what do you think your family will do? I laughed bitterly. They'll tell everyone I'm selfish. They'll call every relative. My mother will cry. Morgan will say I ruined her wedding. My father won't say much. He'll just look disappointed. Daniel nodded. Probably. And if you say yes? I stared into the darkness. The answer came almost immediately. There'll be another request. After the wedding, a house, then a baby, then another emergency. It'll never end. Daniel smiled softly. Exactly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. You've spent 18 years thinking about saying no. Now, it's time to decide. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing my mother's favorite sentence. Family doesn't keep score. For years, I'd believed her. But lying awake in the dark, beside the man who loved me without asking for anything in return, another thought quietly entered my mind. Maybe family wasn't supposed to keep score, but someone certainly had been keeping mine. 3 days later, my mother called again. This time, her voice was even sweeter than before. Come over Thursday afternoon, sweetheart. We're having coffee. And we're starting the wedding planning. She didn't ask if I was available. She never did. In our family, an invitation from my mother was simply another word for an obligation. The drive to my parents' house took barely 15 minutes, long enough for my stomach to knot itself tighter with every mile. Nothing had changed outside. The white porch still needed painting. The flower beds were perfectly trimmed. The old maple tree still shaded the front yard, where Morgan and I had played as children. From the street, it looked like the perfect family home. Appearances had always mattered to my mother. She believed people only judged what they could see. Unfortunately, I had spent 34 years living behind the front door. I knew better. Before I could even knock, the front door swung open. There she is. My mother wrapped me in an enthusiastic hug. So much to plan. So little time. Her excitement felt almost rehearsed. Inside, the dining room table had disappeared beneath glossy wedding magazines, venue brochures, floral samples, fabric swatches, guest lists. Every surface overflowed with expensive dreams. Morgan barely looked up. She was too busy scrolling through photographs on her tablet. Oh my gosh, look at this ballroom. She spun the screen toward me. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, horse-drawn carriage, ice sculptures. It looked less like a wedding and more like a royal coronation. Ethan's family will absolutely love this, she said. I glanced at the estimated price printed discreetly in the corner, $18,700. For the venue alone. I silently handed the tablet back. Mom was already writing figures across a yellow legal pad. Every few seconds, she circled another number. Venue, catering, photography, designer dress, live orchestra, luxury transportation, gift bags, fireworks. Every item carried another breathtaking price tag. Finally, she turned the pad around. At the very bottom, circled twice in thick black ink. $52,400. I stared at it. I thought you said 50,000. Mother smiled. We added a little buffer. A wedding always costs more than people expect, she laughed. You taught me that. No, I taught her budgets. She'd learned entitlement. There was a difference. Morgan suddenly looked up. You'll probably just pay vendors directly. What? Since you're the accountant, it'll be easier. She said it so casually, as though she were asking me to pass the salt. Mom nodded immediately. Oh, that's perfect. You can manage all the payments. No confusion, no delays, no worrying. I almost admired how smoothly they'd done it. They weren't asking for money anymore. They were assigning me responsibility. Responsibility sounded so much kinder than ownership. But it meant exactly the same thing. If I managed every payment, I'd become personally responsible for all of them. Every invoice, every deposit, every over-budget decision, every unexpected expense. The family's personal bank, disguised as the wedding coordinator. Morgan smiled brightly. You don't mind, right? Then she laughed. I mean, you don't even have kids. What else are you saving all that money for? The room became painfully quiet. I looked at my father. He stood by the window pretending to read the newspaper. He never interrupted. Silence had always been his favorite form of agreement. If my mother controlled people with words, my father controlled them by refusing to stop her. He never defended me. He simply allowed things to happen. Sometimes, that hurt even more. Inside me, two versions of myself began fighting. The old Fay, already reaching for her checkbook. Already calculating how much she could move between accounts. Already preparing another sacrifice. And the new Fay, the woman Daniel had started waking up. She whispered only one question. Why? Why 50,000? Why now? Why such urgency? Something felt wrong, not expensive. Wrong. Like finding a single number, out of place inside a perfect spreadsheet. Most people wouldn't notice. An accountant always does. I'll need to review everything, I said calmly. Mother's smile froze for a fraction of a second. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. I'll look at the numbers. I'll let you know this weekend? Morgan frowned. Why? It's just a wedding. Exactly. Just a wedding. Then, why did everyone suddenly look nervous? Why was my mother gripping her coffee cup so tightly? Why wouldn't my father look at me? And why did $52,000 suddenly feel less like a celebration and more like a deadline? The meeting ended with hugs, smiles, promises, normal conversation. Anyone watching would have believed we were a happy family planning the biggest day of Morgan's life. Only I noticed what never happened. No one asked how my business was doing. No one asked how I was. No one asked about my future. Only my wallet had been invited to the meeting, not me. On the drive home, Daniel's words echoed inside my head. Helping isn't the same as solving. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about whether I could afford the wedding. I was wondering something far more dangerous. Why did they need the money so desperately, before the wedding had even been planned? By the time I pulled into our driveway, A quiet suspicion had begun growing inside me, and once suspicion finds an accountant, it usually ends with evidence. The drive home felt longer than 15 minutes. Not because of the distance, because my mind refused to stay quiet. I had spent my entire adult life helping people organize their finances. Businesses, married couples, retires, small companies on the edge of bankruptcy. Every financial disaster followed the same rule. Money always leaves footprints. People lie. Receipts don't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at my family as a daughter. I was looking at them as an accountant. And something wasn't balancing. When I walked into our house, Daniel was sitting at the dining table reviewing contracts. He looked up immediately. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one you get when numbers stop making sense." I managed a tired smile. "I think something's wrong." He closed the file without asking another question. "What happened?" I sat down opposite him. "They didn't actually ask me for $50,000. They appointed me." His forehead creased. "What do you mean?" "They want me to pay every vendor, every deposit, every invoice, everything." Daniel leaned back slowly. "So, they don't want a gift. They want complete financial control through you." I nodded. "And there's something else." "What?" "I can't explain it, but everyone seemed nervous. The money feels urgent. Not important. Urgent." Daniel stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "What happens if the money doesn't arrive?" I opened my mouth, then stopped, because I had no answer. Until that moment, I had assumed the wedding was creating the deadline. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe the deadline had existed first, and the wedding had simply become the excuse. A chill ran through me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked into my office upstairs. The room smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Safe smells? Honest smells. I switched on the desk lamp, pulled out my laptop, opened an empty spreadsheet. At the top, I typed 3 words. Where did it go? Below that, I began listing everything I knew. My parents had refinanced their house 18 months earlier. The amount borrowed had been substantial, nearly $80,000. At the time, my mother had laughed it off. Lower interest rate, nothing exciting. I'd believed her. Now, I wasn't so sure. I began calculating. Mortgage, consulting income, living expenses, insurance, property taxes, utilities. There should still have been tens of thousands left. But there wasn't. Not in savings. Not in investments. Not in repairs. Not anywhere. I stared at the screen. There was a hole. A very expensive hole. And somebody had hidden it well. I printed old tax returns, bank summaries, property records, everything I'd ever prepared for them. Papers slowly covered my desk. 1 file became 3. 3 became 7. Hour after hour, I traced every dollar. Then suddenly, I stopped. The refinance, the missing money, the rushed wedding, the desperate demand. None of them stood alone anymore. They connected, and I still didn't have the picture on the box. Daniel quietly entered the office carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He looked at the mountain of paperwork. "I thought you were sleeping." "I was trying." He set the coffee beside me. "What did you find?" I shook my head. "Nothing." Then I looked at the spreadsheet again. "No, that's not true. I found something." "What?" I slowly turned the monitor toward him. "The numbers. They're hiding something." He studied the page. After nearly a minute, he smiled. "You're not talking like a daughter anymore." I looked at him. "What am I talking like?" "An investigator." He tapped the screen. "If this was one of your clients, what would you do?" The answer came instantly. "I'd follow the money." He nodded. "Exactly. So stop asking why they're asking for 50,000. Start asking why they need it before the wedding." That sentence echoed through my mind. Again, and again, and again. Because he was right. If the wedding were truly the priority, the money could wait. Deposits happen gradually. Bills come later. Nothing about weddings requires panic. Unless the wedding wasn't the real reason. Unless it was covering something else. Outside, a car slowed in front of our house. Its headlights swept across the living room windows. Then, it drove away. Probably nothing. But suddenly, nothing felt ordinary anymore. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of saying no. I was afraid of discovering why they couldn't accept it. I closed the spreadsheet, saved the file, and whispered 4 words that would change everything. Follow the money, Fay. Because somewhere behind Morgan's dream wedding, behind my mother's fake smile, behind my father's silence, someone was hiding a secret worth far more than $50,000. And before this was over, I was going to find it. I had spent 34 years believing my family's greatest problem was money. I was wrong. Money wasn't the problem. It was only the bait. The real secret was waiting inside a locked filing cabinet, and I had no idea my own name was already inside it. But before you go, tell me honestly, have you ever been the one in the family who was only remembered when someone needed money, help, or a sacrifice? if this story touched something you've lived through, right? I chose myself in the comments. I read every single one, and you never know who might find strength in your words. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe now, because in the next part, I unlock my father's filing cabinet, and what I find inside isn't just hidden debt. It's a $90,000 fraud with my name already on it. One missing signature, one family betrayal, and one decision that could destroy everything. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next.